screams have faded. The clash of steel has gone silent. Blood pools in the mud, mixing with rain and the tears of dying men. This is what victory looks like when the crowds aren't watching. Rome built an empire on the backs of its legions. Bronze eagles flew over 3 continents. Triumphal arches celebrated generals. But what happened to the men who didn't come home whole? The ones who survived the battlefield only to face a different kind of war, against their own broken bodies, shattered minds, and an empire that had little use for damaged goods. Today, we descend into the shadows of Roman glory. This is the story of the wounded, the forgotten, the men who gave everything to Rome and received silence in return. Because behind every marble statue of a perfect soldier lies the truth of torn flesh, splintered bone, and souls that never truly left the battlefield. The real cost of empire wasn't measured in gold or territory. It was written in scars that never healed. Picture the moment when iron meets flesh. A Germanic spear punches through a legionnaire's shield, through his mail, into the soft meat of his shoulder. Time stops. The world narrows to that single point of agony as the tip grinds against bone. This is how it began for thousands of Roman soldiers, not with death, but with something worse. The moment their bodies broke, but their hearts kept beating. Roman warfare was intimate violence. No artillery shells or rifle bullets. Men died within arm's reach of their killers, close enough to smell their fear, to see the light fade from their eyes. The gladius, that short, brutal sword, was designed for one thing: to open bodies quickly and efficiently. Thrust to the abdomen, twist, withdraw, find the next target. But when the blade failed to kill cleanly, when it caught on rib or deflected off armor, it left wounds that would haunt a man forever. Intestines spilling onto foreign soil, arms hanging by threads of sinew, faces carved away by barbarian axes. The Celtic longsword could nearly sever a limb with a single swing. Germanic battle axes split skulls like ripe melons. Scythian arrows, dipped in poison, carried death in their wake even when they missed vital organs. And when Roman discipline finally broke enemy lines, the wounded lay scattered across the field like broken dolls. Some screaming, some silent, all forgotten in the rush to claim victory. Centurion Marcus Flavius, writing to his wife after the Dacian campaigns, described stepping over his own men during the pursuit. Their faces were turned to the sky, eyes pleading with gods who had already abandoned them. I could not stop. The battle called, but their voices follow me still. The wounded who survived that first terrible night faced a journey through hell itself. If they were lucky, camp followers would find them before wolves or enemy scavengers did. If not, they lay in the mud, watching their blood drain away while their comrades marched toward the next battle. The valetudinarium, the Roman field hospital, was where hope went to die. Here, in long wooden barracks reeking of vinegar and putrefying flesh, army doctors worked by torchlight to sort the living from the almost dead. They were called medici, but they were closer to battlefield mechanics, patching broken bodies just enough to keep the war machine running. The tools of their trade would horrify us today. Bronze saws for amputation, their teeth worn smooth from cutting through bone. Iron hooks for pulling arrows from flesh. Cauterizing irons, glowing red-hot, ready to seal wounds with fire and agony. No anesthesia except wine and leather straps to bite down on. Aulus Cornelius Celsus, in his medical treatises, describes procedures that sound more like torture than treatment. To remove a deeply lodged arrow, doctors would cut around the entry wound, then use hooks to widen the hole until they could grasp the arrowhead. If the shaft had broken, they might have to dig for pieces of wood or metal with their bare fingers while the patient screamed. Amputation was common, almost routine. A mangled arm meant a quick decision. Saw it off or watch the man die slowly from gangrene. The procedure was brutally simple. Tie off the blood vessels with sinew. Position the bronze saw. Cut quickly while assistants held the patient down. Then burn the stump closed with hot iron, filling the hospital with the smell of searing flesh. The survival rate, perhaps 1 in 3 for major amputations. Infection killed most of the rest within days, their bodies burning with fever as poison spread through their blood. Those who lived faced a different kind of death, the slow realization that they were no longer whole, no longer the men they had been. But the Medici saved who they could. They bound wounds with linen soaked in wine. They used willow bark for pain, though it barely dulled the edge of agony. They set broken bones with wooden splints and hoped the pieces would knit together properly. Some did, many didn't. In the silence between screams, doctors made calculations that had nothing to do with healing and everything to do with utility. Could this man march again? Could he hold a sword? Could he be of use to Rome? If not, he became someone else's problem. The truly skilled physicians like Galen could work miracles, removing cataracts, repairing hernias, even performing primitive brain surgery. But most army doctors were little more than glorified veterinarians, trained to keep horses and men functional enough for battle. And when their crude ministrations failed, when the fever took hold or the wound began to rot, they would simply pull a sheet over another face and move on to the next broken body. In the valetudinarium, mercy wore the mask of efficiency. Not all wounds bled. Gaius Lucretius returned from Britannia with all his limbs intact, his armor unmarked, his weapons sharp. His comrades called him lucky. His wife called him distant. His children learned to fear the wild look in his eyes when thunder rolled across the sky. What we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder stalked Roman camps like an unnamed plague. It had no diagnosis, no treatment, no compassion. It was simply considered weakness, a failure of Virtus, that masculine ideal that demanded stoic endurance of all suffering. The symptoms were always the same. Veterans who startled at every sound. Convinced enemies lurked around every corner. Men who couldn't sleep without wine. Who woke screaming from dreams of burning villages and dying friends. Soldiers who returned from successful campaigns only to retreat into themselves, unable to connect with wives who had become strangers and children they barely remembered. Tacitus writes of Germanic campaign veterans who shunned the company of their fellow citizens, avoided public festivals, and seemed to find no pleasure in the very peace they had won. These men wandered the margins of society, neither fully civilian nor truly military, caught between two worlds that no longer felt real. Some tried to return to the legions, not from loyalty but from desperation. The brutal routine of military life was the only structure that made sense to minds fractured by violence. But even there, they were marked men, jumpy, unpredictable, dangerous to their own comrades. Others simply vanished. They walked away from families, from property, from lives that felt like elaborate dreams. Some became bandits, using their military skills for personal gain. Others died by their own hands, unable to bear the weight of memories that wouldn't fade. Roman society had no patience for such weakness. A true man, they believed, endured all hardships with dignity. To complain about invisible wounds was to invite scorn, to be labeled soft or cowardly. Better to suffer in silence than face the shame of admitting that war had broken something inside you that could never be repaired. The irony was bitter. Rome celebrated its warriors in marble and bronze, immortalizing their strength and courage. But those same warriors, when they returned bearing invisible scars, were forgotten as quickly as yesterday's weather. The empire that demanded their sacrifice had no interest in their healing, and so they endured. In taverns, drowning memories in wine. In brothels, seeking human contact that didn't remind them of death. In the quiet corners of the empire, nursing wounds that would never show but would never heal. What does Rome owe a man who can no longer fight? This question haunted the empire for centuries, answered differently by different emperors according to their mood, their treasury, and their conscience. For the fortunate few who completed 20 to 25 years of service, the answer was clear. The missio honesta, an honorable discharge that came with land, a pension, and respect. These veterans formed colonies across the empire, their service rewarded with citizenship and comfort in their twilight years. But most of the severely wounded never saw such rewards. They were discharged early under the missio causaria, medical discharge that carried honor in name but little else in practice. No guaranteed pension, no land grants, no support from the state that had used their bodies until they broke. These men returned to families who barely recognized them, to farms that had fallen into ruin, to lives that felt like echoes of something they could barely remember. Some had relatives who took them in out of duty or love. Others found themselves begging in the streets of the very cities they had helped conquer. Marcus Aurelius tried to address this crisis by expanding veteran benefits, but his efforts were inconsistent and underfunded. Later emperors cared even less, viewing disabled veterans as expensive reminders of war's true cost. The aerarium militare, the military treasury, was frequently raided for palace luxuries or diverted to fund new campaigns. For those who could still function despite their wounds, reassignment was possible. Scribes, trainers, storekeepers, roles that required experience but not physical prowess. These positions offered dignity and survival, but they were limited and dependent on the goodwill of commanders who had their own priorities. The less fortunate faced harder choices. Some opened taverns with their discharge bonuses, serving wine to men who still had whole bodies and intact dreams. Others became mercenaries, selling their skills to private armies or gladiatorial schools. In the arena, a veteran could turn his pain into spectacle, his suffering into coins from the crowd. But many simply disappeared into the anonymous masses of the empire. Former legionnaires reduced to begging, their military decorations traded for bread, their service forgotten by a society that preferred its heroes frozen in marble rather than limping through the streets. Emperor Augustus had promised that Rome would care for its soldiers as a father cares for his sons. But fathers sometimes abandoned children who cost too much to keep. Time was the cruelest enemy of all. Years after the battles ended, the real war began. Against pain that never fully faded. Against joints that seized up in winter cold, reminding broken bodies of old wounds. Against the slow realization that the empire they had served with such devotion had moved on without them. Some found peace in simplicity. A small farm, a faithful wife, children who never had to know the weight of a sword. These men counted themselves blessed, even with their scars and limitations. They had survived both war and its aftermath, no small achievement in an age when most men died young and violently. Others never stopped fighting. They joined local militias, served as bodyguards for wealthy merchants, taught sword work to the sons of senators. Violence had shaped them so completely that they couldn't imagine life without it. Some of these men found purpose in passing on their skills to the next generation of soldiers. Others simply grew old and bitter, telling stories of battles no one wanted to hear. The unlucky ones faced poverty, disease, and early death. Without family support or steady work, disabled veterans often lived on the margins of Roman society, sleeping in temples, begging at city gates, selling whatever they could salvage from their military service. Their bodies, already weakened by war wounds, succumbed quickly to disease, malnutrition, and despair. Archaeological evidence from across the empire tells their story in fragments. Tombstones marking early deaths, medical instruments found in veteran settlements, inscriptions honoring soldiers who died far from home. These silent witnesses speak to a reality that official histories preferred to ignore. Some veterans found solace in religion. Mystery cults like Mithraism offered brotherhood and meaning to men who felt abandoned by traditional gods. Christianity, as it spread through the empire, promised that suffering had purpose, that the meek would inherit the earth. For broken soldiers, such messages carried special weight. But perhaps the most tragic fate belonged to those who lived long enough to see the empire itself begin to crumble. Veterans who had conquered Gaul and Germania watched barbarian tribes settle within Roman borders as foederati. Men who had enforced Pax Romana witnessed civil wars that tore the empire apart. They had given their bodies to build something eternal, only to watch it decay before their eyes. In the end, most died as they had lived after leaving the legions, quietly, without ceremony, their sacrifices remembered only by family members who would soon join them in forgotten graves. Stand before any Roman statue of a perfect soldier. Muscles carved in marble, armor gleaming, face set in noble determination. Now imagine the reality behind the myth. The missing fingers, the scarred face, the hollow eyes of a man who has seen too much and forgotten too little. This is the true face of Roman glory, not bronze eagles or triumphal parades, but the human cost of empire, written in flesh and blood. These wounded, forgotten men were not footnotes to Roman history. They were its foundation. Every mile of Roman road was built on their broken bodies. They paid the price that made civilization possible.